now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about the importance of continuity and how it helps with the creation of future stories. Now, continuity is the interconnection of a series of events between a book, a comic book, movie, or TV shows. So, continuity is the interconnection of all of the events that take place within a series, whether it be a series of books, a series of episodes in a TV series, a series of issues in a comic book series, or a series of books in a fantasy or sci-fi series. So continuity is making sure that all of the events that happen in a previous story are interconnected with the events in the most recent story. And continuity is a tool that many writers like myself use to motivate readers to get excited about not only the current book that they're holding in their hands, but something that gets them excited about looking to go back and pick up previous books that were published earlier in a series and develop anticipation for the next upcoming book. Now, continuity is not something that's hard to do if a writer understands their world of characters and understands every event that goes on in their worlds of characters. A continuity is something that a writer can easily create if they can keep up with the details of everything that happened previously in that world, and they can take what happened previously in that world and use it to develop story points for the next story in that world. Now, continuity follows a major tenet of screenwriting, and that is that stories are about endings and beginnings. And with screenwriting, whenever you end a story, what you want to do is open a door so that you can be able to tell the next story featuring those characters. So when you're writing with continuity in mind, what you're going to do is you want to keep a door open for your next story and structure your story so that there is a story point for you to pick to create your next story. Now, this is something that I have been doing for years as I have been establishing the foundations for the XJS Direct universe way back as far as 1998 when I started developing the Isis character. And as I was developing the Isis character, I was leaving story points to start laying the foundation for a series as far back as 1999 when I put my fingers to the keyboard for the first Isis story. And as I was building that foundation for Isis's story, I was out here looking to lay the foundation with those story points, and each of the story points were supposed to open the door for telling future stories with the character. And I did the same thing back in 2005 when I started writing The Temptation of John Haynes. When I started writing The Temptation of John Haynes, I was not only writing the story of John Haynes taking on Lucifer as he's tempted by him, I also was laying the foundation for opening the door to bringing new characters into the story. And one of the things that I did as I was laying the foundation for continuity was I introduced the Esteem character into the world of John Haynes. And as I introduced the Esteem character into the world of John Haynes, what this did was enable me to take a character who was previously dead and give her a new direction and also be able to start laying the foundation for the SJS Direct universe and bringing other characters like Isis into the 21st century. Now, I did this by picking story points from previous stories. Now, one of the previous stories I took a story point from was a small short story I did called The Politics of Hell. And in that Politics of Hell story, I brought the esteemed character back from the dead because she was killed in the first Isis with a spear to the chest. And I managed to work bringing her back to life in The Politics of Hell by introducing Lucifer into the SJS Direct universe. And as I introduced Lucifer into the SJS Direct universe, I started laying the foundation for the adversarial relationship between Lucifer and Esteem, and that was a major story point that I pulled into The Temptation of John Haynes in 2005, and that was the catalyst for much of The Temptation of John Haynes' story. So I took story points from The Politics of Hell and used that as part of the story for The Temptation of John Haynes. And as I was doing that, what I was doing was taking story points from two previous stories, 2002's Isis, and I believe about 2004 or 2003's Politics of Hell, and I used those to lay the foundation for The Temptation of John Haynes. And as I was laying the foundation for The Temptation of John Haynes and bringing John Haynes and Esteem together, bringing two worlds of characters together, this is where I started building the foundation for continuity by taking the story points from past stories I did and past characters I did and creating a brand new story. And that brand new story laid the foundation for the SJS Direct universe, allowing me to take earlier stories that I did, like the first Isis, Baptism of Blood, and The Politics of Hell, stories like that, and taking those characters and putting them in a brand new story, and using that brand new story to start laying the foundation for a 21st century continuity featuring all three core characters, Isis, Esteem, and John Haynes. And as I laid that foundation for the SJS Direct universe with 2005's The Temptation of John Haynes, as I was starting this new story, I started putting story points in that story to be able to lay the foundation for introducing all of those characters into what I was laying down as the foundation for the SJS Direct universe. Now, Esteem was brought in to the story organically as a character, but I wanted to also bring in other characters in ways that were very nuanced so that we wouldn't have the story being overwhelmed and the focus not taken off of Esteem and John. So while I wanted to go out here and put points in there to reference Isis, I didn't want the character there because she would have been clutter to the story. But I did put several nuanced hints that let people know that Esteem and John Haynes are in the same universe as the Isis characters, and two of those things that I put in was in a chapter talking about the Ujamaa Conference, where there's an ice sculpture of Isis. That's the first reference I make to Isis, and in the later part of the story, after the Morris Phillips penthouse is burnt down, there's a reference to Osiris where Esteem looks up at the sky and says her father knows where to find her. And with those two references, the Isis character is brought into the SJS Direct universe and shown as part of the same universe. And in another story, I take a story point in a book called The Thetas to start making more hints to Isis. And in that story, The Thetas, what I do is go out here and show how Doc Flowers, one of Isis's pledges at her sorority, the Thetas, is a close friend of Isis's previous alias, Andrea Thomas Robinson, and in that scene, in that one picture, I show that the Isis character was a part of that world in the 20th century, and I use that as the foundation for the story points that I used to open up for 2012's Isis Amari's Revenge. Now, Isis Amari's Revenge is a story that takes story points from the Temptation of John Haynes and the Thetas to establish that Isis is in the same world as John Haynes and Esteem, and this leads to the first meeting between Esteem and Isis in over a century, and this is the story, again, takes from story points from 2002's Isis, where Isis talks about her rivalry with Princess Amari, and also takes from story points from the politics of hell, leading to which was Isis and Esteem's final confrontation as arch enemies before she wound up with Lucifer after a humiliating defeat, and it reintroduces the characters in a brand new story. But as it's introducing those characters in a brand new story, what I'm doing is taking story points from previous stories and using them to create a brand new story. And that's all that continuity is. Continuity is a writer going out here and picking story points from a previous story and using them to craft a brand new story, because stories, again, are about endings and beginnings, and if a writer picks the right story points, they can go out here and create a fresh and brand new story. And that's what I did after I did the first 3 Isis series books. I started creating brand new stories featuring the goddess next door, and those brand new stories that I created after I did Amari's Revenge, The Ultimate Fight, and The Beauty Myth were story points that I used for future Isis stories. Now, after I did Amari's Revenge, I did a story called The Ultimate Fight, where Isis took on the Nemesis character at an ultimate fight as she's looking to plan to return to the world and go back to teaching. And I took story points from that story to create other stories in the Isis series, such as My Sister, My Frenemy, where we see the outcome of the interview that she was planning to go on. And in The Beauty Myth, she's trying to buy the suit for that interview, but then gets kidnapped by the Sepia Cosmetics owner, Rahima Sanders. And as she's kidnapped by Rahima Sanders, that confrontation leads to a climax that builds and opens up the story for Isis Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, a major story that leads to Isis meeting John Haynes. So every story point that's in your story there are ones that you can use to open the door for creating new stories, and continuity in the hands of a creator who has laid a solid foundation can be used to go out here and not only build a world of characters, but be used as a foundation that is solid enough for a creator to be able to pick story points, to create new stories, to follow up on previous events, and not only follow up on those previous events, but be able to create new events out of the previous events, and also create different types of relationships between the characters that can create story points that a writer can pick up on to go out here and create their next story. So, in the hands of a skilled writer, continuity can be used as a tool to find story points to create a brand new story, or create story points where you can develop the character and show us this character in different aspects as related to their personality. A good writer can go out here and utilize their continuity and use it to be able to create a whole run of stories. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years as I've been working on the stories of the SJS Direct universe. I have been out here creating all kinds of stories, picking my story points from earlier stories and using them to create new stories regarding the stories that chronicle the adventures of the goddess next door, the man who rules the world, John Haynes, or Hell's aspiring angel, formerly the devilish diva, Esteem. I'm always coming up with brand new story points, and they all exist from stories I've written in the past, but I go out here and I can take a fresh take and fresh perspective because I have a good understanding of my continuity. Now, you can't just rest on your laurels when it comes to continuity because you might wind up making a mistake with your details if you don't go out here and read your previous work. That's something I do all the time. I always take a minute to go read an old story as I'm working on a new one, because right now I'm working on a new story called Esteem Season of the Witch Girl, and I have to go back to a story I wrote called The Witches of Eastland to read all the story points to make sure that all the story points from Witches of Eastland flow into Season of the Witch Girl. So whenever you're writing a story in continuity, not only do you want to go out here and pick your story points, you want to make sure that you read your previous stories so every event in the previous story flows organically into the current story that you're writing. That is something I had to do when I wrote Isis the Ultimate Fight, and then I took the story point of Isis making plans to go on this interview at Columbia University, and she was getting ready to go to that interview in the Beauty Myth. She was coming out of the Brooks Brothers store. So while she has the meeting with Doc in the Starbucks on 125th Street and in Ultimate Fight and has a confrontation with Nemesis afterward, then later on, in the Beauty Myth, she's going to pick up the suit for the interview. But in My Sister, My Frenemy, this is where she gets the rejection letter for the interview at Columbia University, and this is where the continuity flows from her changing her philosophy from going to try to be a teacher like she was in the 20th century as Andrea Thomas Robinson to going where she needs like a goddess would. This is what Esteem advises her to do. And this leads into this whole philosophy is one that follows in other stories. And again, this is how continuity works. And you can just pick the reference points. You see what happened in the previous story has an impact on the next story. And if you start reading all the stories together, it creates a larger picture of this character, shows you a larger picture of this character's life. And if the story points are ones that are referenced in the right way, what can happen is readers will get so excited about hearing, oh, they're talking about this, I want to find out what this is about. So they run to go pick up the previous books in the series. And this was something that I took from comic books when I was growing up, because I would read comic books back in the day, and they would have these markers at the bottom that would say, oh, what he's talking about happened in such and such book number 15, or such and such book over here. And I put that in the books because I wanted readers to go back to past books, because that's the foundations of research for readers, and it makes reading just that more exciting. When you go to a place like a comic shop and go and look in the back issues, or you go and you look in back books and you find out, oh, everything he said in the book happened actually here. This is very exciting, especially for young kids. I know a lot of kids who were comic fans, when you heard about, oh, this guy's first appearance was in this book, they want to go get that book or a reprint of that book to find out what happened, or they want to go out here and pick up that story and find out what happened. Like if something was mentioned in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and it's referenced in Sorcerer's Stone, it's going to make people want to go read Sorcerer's Stone. Or if there's a Star Wars book and something is referenced in that 8th book and it's mentioned in another book, people are going to want to go get those books. So continuity can be a tool that can sell old past books, and it can keep past books in print, because I've seen people go back for entire runs of Isis, John Haynes, and Esteem, and I've also seen people go back for books in other book series that I've done, like the Spinsterella trilogy books like Spellbound, The Legendary Mad Matilda, and Spinsterella, and Eternal Night. All four of those books are interconnected, and all four of those books have continuity, and I used each of those books to create a new book from the events in a previous book. Now, Spinsterella trilogy, I wrote that completely backwards, with Spinsterella, the last story being written in 2015, and then after I wrote the story of Matilda Crowley, a black goth in Harlem, I watched a lot of goth videos and listened to a lot of goths and talked to goths online. I decided to do a story about her baby bat phase, which was really her origin story, called Spellbound. I wrote that in 2016. And after viewers got so excited about Spellbound, that's where I decided to let people know what happened in that time that Matilda was in after she graduated college, the legendary Mad Matilda, and that was me establishing continuity from this character from the period of, at that time, 2015 to 1989 to 1995. And when you have good continuity and the events are lining up, people can follow the events of a character's life, and that's what happens when you use continuity as a tool. The readers can follow the action in each of the stories, and they can follow the action in those stories, and the writer can pick up on those story points. And that's what I'm getting ready to do right now. I've got a story that I'm going to set in the year 2000 called Spinsterella's Goth Girl Summer, and this story, which is set in the year 2000, is about Matilda in the new millennium. And I will be, I think, talking a bit about the cyber goth subculture, and also talking about the .com boom, and talking about Wega TVs, flat screen TVs back then, and all sorts of 2000 stuff, because 2000 was a big year for me. That was the year I was working for AmeriCorps Vista, but with Matilda, she's on the road to a big promotion. I'm giving away a lot of details here for this story that I'm planning to do, but the whole thing is, it's all part of a continuity. I already wrote story points for it way back in 2015 with Spinsterella, which is 8 years ago, which is wow. But the whole thing is, I wrote story points in Spinsterella that I've already laid out, because even though the story of Matilda and the Quiet Man ended, there are plenty of Matilda stories to tell, and that's because I know that stories are, again, about endings and beginnings, and you have to have your story points in place so that when you're ready to tell that next story, you can use that point to tell your next story, which is what I did with Spinsterella when she talked about her going to jail. That was a major part of legendary Mad Matilda's story point, and the whole point of her being shy was the big part of Spellbound, and showing how becoming a part of the goth scene helped her develop her confidence. I mean, story points are very nuanced, and if you know what to look for, you can go out here and find the story points to tell your next story. And continuity, again, is a tool that a writer can use to tell great stories, and it's one that can get readers excited for your stories if you know how to build a great future out of your character's past. Now, if you want to pick up any of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, like the Isis series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the Black Sorority novel, The Thetas, or the vampire novel, Eternal Night, and see how continuity works in the SJS Direct universe, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find all of those books at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to try out my first two comics, John Haynes at Death's Door. You can find John Haynes at Death's Door in paperback on Lulu.com, and you can get a paperback version of Esteem No Good Deed in the Esteem book, Esteem Blast from the Past, or you can pick up a Kindle version for just 99 cents. And if you'd like to see me be able to make more books in the SJS Direct universe, or make more comics from SJS Direct, I really want to do a comic featuring the Goddess Next Door, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, My Sister, My Frenemy. It's a sister act as the Goddess Next Door and the Devilish Diva team up in this action-packed Isis series adventure. Get Isis, My Sister, My Frenemy in paperback and e-readers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, All About the Goddess. The Goddess Next Door bears all in the art studio to catch a campus stalker in this action-packed Isis series mystery. Get your copy of Isis, All About the Goddess in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.